Everyone, I'm Nina Goradia. I'm here with Aloshin Duki for part 2 of the self-realization series. I will link the first video here if you want to refresh. And before we start, I want to give a quick disclaimer that non-duality is not psychotherapy, and either is somatic experiencing. Please use caution when applying any of the things we're talking about. Only do what feels right for you. Seek professional help if you need it. Okay. So thank you, Aloshin, for being here. Today, we're going to talk about self-realization, and we're going to also explain the 8 questions that were on the thumbnail of this video that were written by my teacher, Ryan.
That's okay. You're welcome.
Okay, so let me pull this up. So it was my idea to go through these 8 questions together, but Aloshin has mentioned that he is going to just speak as to his experience, and so we might be going a little bit back and forth or on different tangents, but I will bring us back to these 8 questions that my teacher Ryan wrote to help me understand conceptually, intellectually, what self-realization is. It's not the experience of it, but understanding the logic behind this. So I love how Aloshin explains things, so I thought that he and I would both explain this in our own ways, and then the maximum number of people can benefit, and you can see what resonates for you. So Aloshin, do you have anything you want to start off with, or do you want to go into this first one? I clearly understand what is meant by God or the absolute.
So I could explain what my understanding of God or absolute is and see if it
But
aligns with yours.
yeah.
So to me, everything in experience is constantly changing. Because it's constantly changing, you can't really pin down what anything is. It doesn't seem to have any isness to it. It lacks identity. It's kind of ephemeral. If you actually pay attention to how things are, all forms seem to be constantly changing and you can't really pin something down. So when we say something is changing, it's always changing with respect to something. So the fact that something is changing, it must be changing against a background and against a background that itself is changeless. This changeless background, because it's changeless, it means it has always been the same. If it's always the same, it means that it has never born and then died, because that would make it different. So this changeless background that has never born or died, i.e., is eternal, is also formless. It doesn't have a specific form by the very nature that it's not changing. The only thing that is changing that I can see and experience are forms. So this changeless background that is eternal and formless is what seems to precede existence itself. And that to me is what the absolute or God or I am.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And our first video does go into this quite a bit, but I will add some things here. So we can call it God, the absolute, infinite consciousness, self with a capital S, whatever feels right for you. You don't have to adopt a certain term, but knowing what these terms are pointing to is what's important, and understanding the definition of that. So another way that we can think about this, so I'm going to use the convention he for God just for this example, but it could be she, it, whatever. So if all that existed in the beginning before creation was God, then what material could he have used to create all of creation from if nothing else existed? So he would have had to use himself as the material. And so that would mean that he's omnipotent, he's omnipresent, he's limitless. So that would mean that he has to be part of everyone and everything. And this actually goes into the second question. It's clear from the definition that everything must be God, including me. because this changeless background upon which everything is happening, it's it's like the substratum of all of existence. It's what all of existence has in common, and that includes all of us. So these are made in, 4 different columns here. And so this is the first 2 questions is the first column of understanding. Simply understanding what is meant by God or the absolute. Aloshan, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, no, that's it. I've given my understanding of what it is.
Okay. Okay. So many of us, especially myself, I've had historically this codependent relationship with God where it felt like God was outside of me and I was searching and reaching. And this helped collapse that duality in realizing God is inside me. And that made a huge difference where it helped with stopping seeking, clinging to external things, and an internalization of consciousness because what we might be striving for, and then we realize it's inside of us, it collapses questions, seeking, clinging, attachments. It might be hard to always stay there, but once you experience it, you see that, oh wow, this is completely self-fulfilling. I can just stay here. God is inside of me. So that helped for me collapsing that duality and codependency around the search for God. And the first day that Ryan showed me these questions, and by the way, he doesn't even remember these questions now. He made them over a year and a half ago for me. It's not something he's attached to, but this is just a framework to help people who are not yet self-realized, who are in their conditioned mind. These are the words that we can use to speak to the conditioned mind to help it transition into a larger understanding. So when he showed me this the first day, I was like, I'm not sure. The first 1 or 2 that feels pretty good. The rest, I don't know. I would like some proof. Some of the later questions talk about, I don't need proof. It seems obvious. So we paused. This is a process, these questions. It takes some time before we feel like we strongly agree on these, like based on our progress, so we can continue to check in. But the very next day, I thought, let me try this on. And so I tried, I am the absolute, just to see how it felt. And I personally went into bliss within 5 seconds of doing this. And it stayed for several days. And then through that lens, I looked at these questions, and at least 6 of them were strongly agree. And the other 2 were agree. And I thought, wow, yeah, like I can see this. But then that experience left. And then I thought, oh no, is it gone? Did it leave? And then Ryan explained to me, we're not looking to grab onto any experience. Experiences come and go. That's why the conceptual understanding is so important. Because when an experience goes and then we think, oh, I lost it, and then we might have all these thoughts, we need to have one conceptual, intellectual story to shut down all other stories. And so if I have this story, I am the absolute. Remember, yes, logically, this must be true. This has been deduced by Western philosophers, many of them years ago. They can't see the absolute independently of form in this material reality, but they've deduced this must be true. So if we can remember using the logic, this deduction, yes, I must be the absolute. Even in the worst moments where things feel really hard and I don't feel like I am, that will help get us through the hard times, and it will shut down all other stories that the mind throws at you, telling you what you are. You are this, you are that, you're not enough. And it really works. I couldn't believe how well it shut the other stories down, because when you're saying I'm the absolute, you're saying I'm worthy. So any of these thoughts that are saying that you're not, they're automatically shut down. You're saying that you're enough. You're saying that you have everything you need to be fulfilled. So a lot of these thoughts of lack just get shut down. So I encourage people to try it on as well. Try on this I am the absolute or whatever wording feels right for you. I am self with the capital S or infinite consciousness. And then see what sort of experience you're having. Because oftentimes our body can have some barometer for showing you the truth. But remember not to get attached to the experience. And so once we get strongly agree on all of these 8 questions, they're statements, but the question is, do you agree? Do you disagree? Then that would constitute conceptual self-realization. Intellectually, I understand the foundation for self-realization. So I'll pause here. Aloshan, do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, I have many thoughts about
Okay.
what you've just
Okay.
said.
Yeah.
But it'll probably be more helpful to your viewers to just explain it from the way I see things from my point of view
Mhm.
presently, rather than trying to go back in time and remember how I would have seen things and if this would have helped me in the past. I don't like to rely on my memory. It's terrible. So I can't even
Mhm.
remember how I used to be. It's not important.
Mhm.
So to me, and this might not work for everyone, your mileage may vary. Um, but to me, I had to use the mind to cut away the mind. So I had to use the mind to cut off bigger and bigger chunks of the mind to find out what I was not. So this here, I would have said would not have been enough for me. I could agree with a lot of this, but immediately, I guess because of not the training I had, but the way I looked into things, is that I would always confirm with my direct experience first. Because all of these things that I read and other people write, and there's so many layers of their understanding there, and I need to confirm it. It's what's happening directly with me. So if I am falling on strife and I am having issues and I have these thoughts that are popping up and I don't understand things, I would ask who is the one that is having these thoughts? Who is the one that is experiencing all these issues? Not as a mechanism to throw me into some state of bliss or that I can have another realization. Literally asking the question, okay, there seems to be a thing here that posits itself that has all these problems. Show me this thing. It's speaking so loudly on my behalf for so long. What is it? Okay, it's this thing called I say I am angry, I am sad, I am this, I am that. It seems to be this thing called I, but what is this thing called I? What part of my experience has always been the same? And then I realized the experience of I am seems to be the same. It's always I am and then something. I am happy. I am sad. I am this. I am that. There seems to be an experience, a thought that enters my consciousness first. This is what is sometimes called the I thought. This is the main foundational thought that pops up into the mind, claims to be you, and then has all these other thoughts on behalf of this I thought. So I would say, okay, there seems to be this thought, all of it are thoughts, but there seems to be this feeling of being a self, of being a thing, a limited form that has these sensations, sometimes stuck behind the eyes, that are having all these problems. Let me investigate. I've took it for granted that this self is this body, is this mind. I've just taken that for granted because that's what I learned in school, that the self is born and it has a brain, and then the brain generates this awareness, and then this awareness can die when I die, and this awareness was born whenever I was born. These are all beliefs that I have, but is it in my experience? So I simply look at my experience and I'd be like, wow, there's only one thing here that I can really point to. It's this sense of existence. In fact, I can't even say I am. I can't even say I am, that there is a thing existing beyond the sense that there is existence. Because truly, I could be a brain in a vat somewhere. This could be an entire dream. But to even doubt the sense of existence, something must exist. For me to even doubt that statement. So clearly, something exists. So at this point, I don't know what exists. Something exists. Then the insight at this point that as you usually had, you realize what happens is that there's this feeling of being, just the sense of existence that is joined to this I thought. This I thought incorrectly identifies with the sense of being, and it makes you feel like you are just identifying you are this limited mind body unit, but you can't think your way out of this. So you can only come back to the one thing you know is true. You've basically spent years using your mind cutting away what is not you. Perceptions, feelings, thoughts, ideas, beliefs, all these things are not you. And you've thrown them away over years and years and years. And you finally, after years of honing all this down, you're down to the one thing that may be you, but you're not sure yet. It's this sense of existence. Stay there. That is as far as you can go as a human being. The rest is by the grace of God, i.e., the rest is the accident of enlightenment. If you stay there at the sense of existence, in the sense of being, you may be lucky enough that as you stay there and you throw away all these other thoughts and ideas that come up into your head, claiming its importance, and you just stay at the bare sense of existence, it's almost as if from the other side, you're like pulled in. It's almost as if the mind falls back into itself and dies. So if you stay with this I thought, because that's just the I thought at the end, if you stay with this I thought and you are just aware of being aware, if you stay at that point of being aware of being aware, the I thought stops generating other thoughts, and eventually it starts to cannibalize itself. It starts to consume itself. When that I thought is extinguished, then what is plainly obvious is revealed. So if what we are saying is true, that God, the absolute, is infinite and eternal, that means it's happening all the time. That means it's here right now. So that means that our claim is that it's here right now, but we are just doing things that are causing ignorance. So all we need to do is stop doing these things. I have a quote here that I'll read quickly. Be quiet in your mind, quiet in your senses, and also quiet in your body. Then, when all these things are quiet, don't do anything. In that state, truth will reveal itself to you. If you truly want to find out what is true, then what is true should shine forth when all of your mind stuff and all the other nonsense is gone. Once everything that can be burnt is burnt, the only thing that is left is the unburnt, the unburnable, which is what you are, which is God, the absolute itself. So every time I face a struggle in life, I'm going to ask who's the one facing it. Simply that question itself completely makes the attention recede back into its source. And then you are reminded of the realization. If you've had the transcendent realization, you are reminded of this transcendent realization. And then there's no more problem. Oh, sure, a thought will pop up again at some point in time. If you aren't fully liberated, if you haven't let it wash out, thoughts will pop up again. Who's having that thought? Bang, immediately pull back into the source. What's the problem? Continually doing this, and every time you go back to the source, you are washed out further and further. Eventually, these phenomena that used to pop up and dazzle the mind with all its uh, majesty just means nothing anymore, because you know what home is, you know who you are, you know what you are.
Yes. And we spoke a little bit about the difference between conceptual realization and this transcendent self-realization in our previous video, but we can also differentiate here that these questions are for the conceptual, but Aloshan just explained how to work towards that transcendent, which we don't have control over when it dawns, but we can do these practices to increase the probability of that. And
We can get to the doorway. We can get right to the doorway and then wait for the grace of God. So,
yeah.
so it's my belief that all efforts should be made to remain at that doorway. If there's any issues in your life, come back to the I am and stay there. That's the doorway. That's the only thing you know to be true. Everything else could be false. So every time you find that you're in fear, run to the truth, or at least what you believe your truth to be. And if anyone looks, they should be able to find that their current truth is the sense of existence. It's the one thing they cannot doubt. Just go there. Go to the only thing you know to be true, because we want to find out the truth. We don't care about these words of realization and stuff. It's just we want the truth. So go to the only thing you find to be true and stay at that doorway. And if you knock, God will open.
Yeah. But before that, and you can do this, so before this or simultaneous to this, these words can be helpful for the conditioned mind. This can be helpful for bridging some of that understanding, but then there will be a point where you need to let them go. And is that what you're referring to, Eloshin? Like, if that's the point where you don't need those words anymore?
Yeah, so I'm finding it difficult to track back in my experience and look
Yeah,
at it from the
yeah,
view of that, because to me all these are just more words and more
yeah.
concepts and more mind stuff to fill the mind with, more to think about, when all you should be doing is going back to what you know is true, which currently for all people is a sense of existence. So I'm finding it difficult to travel back and look at it from the mind of someone who just knows nothing about realization.
Okay. But you'd mentioned before we started recording that you can see the value in the words before, like as a
Yes.
foundation.
Yes, so I can see if someone has completely sat, so you pull someone up from the street that has no idea about any of this and they don't understand what are you talking about,
Yeah.
and they want to have some kind of a conceptual understanding.
Mhm.
This, I guess, would be the framework of that would start the discussion with
Yeah.
someone that's awakened as to what all this means. Otherwise, you're just shooting in the dark. It's honestly, it's different strokes for different folks, because it just depends what kind of mind you have, I guess. It definitely doesn't hurt. This definitely doesn't hurt. There's nothing wrong about this. There's nothing here that contradicts my understanding that I can see. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. Um, it's I guess to for minds that were the same to my mind, where they just are interested in burning the untruth, so only the truth remains, just viciously going at everything with a sledgehammer just to see what's left.
Mhm.
That kind of inquiry doesn't lend to this structure. But I do see the value in this for some minds.
Mhm. Yeah, so Aloshin and I both had the same teacher, Ryan, but as you can see, we have to do what is right for us, and we've both had many other teachers and things that we've studied, and we kind of find the things that work for us personally. This is something that Ryan had written up for me almost 2 years ago now, and this is something that helped me bridge because I hadn't been as deep into the self-realization work as the somatic work. So this was a nice bridge for me, but then it took some time. Like, this is a process. You want to revisit these questions if this feels like a paradigm that resonates for you. You want to revisit them and then see what your answers are as you go along. They may change, and once you get to strongly agree on all of these, then you want to be doing the Lotion mentioned about being with the sense of existence, and you can do that simultaneously as well. But for someone who doesn't understand the basics, I think that it's very important to understand the logic behind this, because otherwise you could be in a situation that I was in for 10 to 20 years. I kept going in and out of bliss. I kept having long experiences of bliss and then falling out and not understanding the logic behind who I was and what was happening, and always, feeling like I lost the experience and that it was the experience. But what Ryan says is that this understanding intellectually of self-realization is more important than any experience. Because again, experiences come and go. And so if I can't remember who I am, then I'm not going to get lost in this chasing of experience. I will have the wisdom of holding on to the truth intellectually when I'm not having an experience, a direct experience that's confirming it in that moment. But when I did have experiences confirming this and I had this logic given to me together, I think Alosh and I have come from complete opposite ends in our journeys.
Yeah.
He came from, having studied this initially, not this exact thing, but self-realization deeply before having done somatic work. I think it can be helpful for people to get both of our perspectives on this because maybe you fall more in one camp than the other with your experience.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, so see what is resonating for you, and I'm glad both of our experiences are in this video, and you can kind of go with what feels right. This next column of belief, I would bet on this being true. It's more logical than any alternative I can think of. The reason we go into belief, when many of you who are familiar with this path, it's not advocating for any belief, right? So why is there belief here in this conceptual part of self-realization? It goes into how we cannot necessarily find 100% evidence for this. This was found through deduction. And when we look at the absolute, or we actually cannot look directly at the absolute without it being a part of form in this reality. There's not really a way that we can have proof or evidence of this in the traditional ways that we look for proof or evidence. A lot of things are being done with quantum physics. There's common sense, logical observations that the only things I can know is that I exist and I'm experiencing. But this goes into the certainty questions. It seems obvious. Don't care about proof. It wouldn't strengthen my conviction. It's because we're not really going to get it. So what we're trying to see something that is unseen. We're trying to keep our attention on the formless behind the form, the unmanifest behind the manifest here in this world of form and illusion. We want to hang on to the one thing that doesn't change, and that's the substratum of all this existence. What's behind all of this physical form. And we are not form. That's not our true identity. So I will pause here, but I wanted to explain why these questions are set up the way they are. It was very hard for me to believe or feel certainty about this until I had a direct experience confirming it. Then it was completely obvious. So, for those of you who may not have had an experience like that before, keep working on it logically, but then see if you start having transcendent experiences or experiences of silence or no mind. And in those moments, revisit these questions and it might seem obvious. I'll pause here. Aloshan, if you have anything to say.
No, no, that nothing else to say there.
Okay. This last column of integrity, and we can also think of it as integration work. I find myself reflecting on this understanding frequently. I catch myself when I have thoughts that contradict my understanding. So this is really the application of the knowledge that we have of who we are. Am I behaving in the world in a way that is embodying this knowledge? Am I treating other people as if they are myself? That the truth is oneness. So when we talk about I am the absolute, and everyone is the absolute, and so are the trees, and so are the rocks. And so we're not higher or lower than anything else. We're fundamentally connected. The infinite consciousness inside of me is the infinite consciousness inside of you and everybody. And when we recognize this oneness, this inherent lack of separateness between all of us and everything, we reflect on this understanding. And so when someone treats us a certain way, we notice if we have thoughts about them being an other, or something where we're judging, and oh yeah, wait, this person is another manifestation of me, and I want to treat them the way I'd want to be treated, the way that I treat myself. So reflecting on this understanding and then catching myself when I have thoughts that contradict it. And this goes into liberation work, which is the somatic work. So we talk about in somatic experiencing, this is actually a chart I made combining somatic experiencing with non-duality. And so when I have saved patterns in my body, I do need to unload this even if I have cleared my mind, because this is all the previously saved emotion. And so we want to have a clear mind and know who we are. And that's a wonderful base for doing somatic work, but you don't have to wait till you self realize. You can start doing somatic work. But as Ryan has very eloquently described to me, if you start with somatic work only, and you're going to hit a point where there's too many stories. That's what happened to me. That's why I really needed something like this to shut down all of those other stories. And he said, if you start from self realization work only, you're going to hit a spot where you're too afraid of emotions or they're very stuck. So you want to actually feel free to start from both ends if you'd like, and you can meet in the middle. That's what Ryan recommends now. You know, Aloshan and I came from opposite ends of this, and I think we discovered some of this along the way, seeing both of our journeys. But there are people who come at this in their own unique way. So you can think about where you've been going on your journey and what feels like it could use a little bit more attention. Aloshan, do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, so this is the point of where I am, and for me it's almost feels like a never-ending journey where the mind will spin up and generate specific thought patterns. It is much easier for me to be aware of them when they do occur, and I am able to reference the realization that I had um, when they do occur. So this actually takes all the weight out of them, and all that's left is just the bare sensations. Um, so being able to strip them of meaning and just seeing anxiety as just a sensation um, has allowed me to process a lot of these stuck sensations because they aren't really emotions, they're just sensations with labels that and meanings that the mind has imposed on them. Um, so at the start, yes, I found myself reflecting on the understanding quite frequently because it kind of affected everything that I did. It was reality itself. And when I had the realization, I looked around and I saw, I keep coming back to the dream reality. It's almost perfect. Um, I felt that just like when you're dreaming and in your dream, you have all these characters and you are also dreaming that you have a body in the dream as well. That body is just as unreal and just as made up by your mind as every other body in the dream. So it feels exactly equal as that. And the real you is the one sleeping in bed. The thing that you in bed share with the dream character is the knowing of that is what is shared. It's the same knowing between the dream character, so the ones having the in the dream world, and the one
Is that your cat?
sleeping in bed. Yeah, that is my small
I
kitty.
just got the tail.
Yeah, so it was quite interesting when I had the realization, and that's that was something I could reference, and I could see that my mind was just creating stories about things. That's where like 80% of my suffering was coming from. The sensations themselves actually weren't that bad. The
Mhm.
situation I was in was actually not that bad.
Yeah.
Especially as I started to actually like quantify what was happening, what I actually was experiencing, how much worse it could be. I was able to be grateful for a lot of the stuff I was going through, and look at others that weren't as fortunate as I was, and through no fault of my own. Like, I didn't do anything. It just happened to be in this circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's not through me doing anything or gaining anything. It was just I happened to be in a certain circumstance and someone else happens to be in a different one. So it allowed me to be grateful for the things that I had and the stuff that was going on in my life, and that itself, and looking at the realization or remembering the realization, reflecting on it, it started to change the way I behaved in the world. It increased like empathy went up a hundredfold. It's almost like from realizing the sense of existence that I have, it's the same sense of existence that's in you and every living thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that's what the absolute is. I'm not saying that it's the sense of existence, but that's true though. Every living thing has to have the sense of existence because that's what everything else is predicated on. So in the beginning, finding that commonality allowed me to have immense compassion for other beings because they, at the very core, when I threw everything else away and I felt that the sense of existence was all that was left, I knew they must at least have that too. And that allowed me to find commonality with them.
Yeah,
Uh, and yeah, I do catch myself when I have thoughts that contradict my understanding. I don't really feel like I have thoughts anymore. I just feel like thoughts like occur. I'm not really having them. They the same as like any other thing that happens in my body. So I definitely see thoughts that go completely against this understanding, but I don't take them seriously. I don't go like, oh, that must mean I do not realize. It's just a thought. Um, so yeah, that happens. That happens frequently. My mind is still active depending on how much pain I'm currently in, or if I've eaten well that day, or if I've eaten terribly. My blood sugar level, I find it, my mind, the activity on my mind depends on a lot of things, but it's not an indicator of anything to me. It's just it's the mind. It like just as my heart would beat faster under specific circumstances, my mind thinks more under like specific circumstances. It means nothing in terms of who I am.
that's right. We don't have to identify with mind activity. We don't have to think that we lost self-realization because mind activity arises again. Once you see clearly who you are, there may be silencing of mind and quietness, but as soon as the attachment that is stored in the body gets triggered by some circumstance or event, it's going to kick up the mind again. But what got triggered is the stored stuff. So it doesn't mean that you lost self realization. I'm just talking to anyone who might be going through this. It just means that you have to now do the somatic or liberation work to clear the attachment that got kicked up from the body. And once you do that, the mind will go silent again. For those of you who are new to this chart, I will link a video up here explaining this in detail. But that's why it's really important to not only do the self realization work, but to also simultaneously or before or after do the somatic work. And this is not that well known with the non-dual community. There are some non-dual teachers who talk about the somatic work, but I think we were very lucky to meet Ryan, who integrates the somatic work with self-realization, because it's really important to then embody this knowledge we have, because there are people who are self-realized and they may think that they're done, that they are fully enlightened, but they haven't processed their stored traumas and emotions. And that can come out, it can hurt people, it can get triggered. But when they're self realized, they might be completely detached from if they've hurt somebody. And I think we've heard of stories of gurus and scandals and different things like that. And that's why it's really important to do the somatic work as well. I had one teacher, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, tell me, make sure you do the trauma work before you awaken, for this exact reason, because after awakening, you might be so detached that you don't care to do any of the trauma or integration work. So it's just something to be aware of so that we can, make sure that we're treating people the way that we'd want to be treated. So, anything else on your mind, Aloshin, as we close up?
Um, no, I think you have it pretty much down. Um, Yeah, I don't really have anything else to share except for that it's quite a journey. From the perspective I have now, I can see that I am really not doing anything. Everything is just
Right.
happening. So a lot of this process is not a doing, it's a getting out of the way. It's an
Mm-hmm.
undoing. Because if what we say is true, if it's the truth, it should exist all the time, absolutely, which is why we call it the absolute, which means it's happening right now. It's going on right now. Um, so it should be clear to see at any point in time.
Yeah, it is a process. It took me over a year to get to strongly agree on all of these. Then it took several months after that to have a transcendent self-realization, which I could not control. It just happened. I just woke up from the dream. And again, we talk about this in a lot of detail in our previous video, but Aloshin is speaking from the perspective of full self-realization. So it can be hard to remember some of the journey. Not that this was his journey, this is my journey here that I'm sharing, but it can be hard to kind of remember and speak from that place. So he's speaking from the place of being done, and it's like he's not doing anything. But what I think of with these questions, as I was mentioning earlier, having one story that shuts down all other stories, what it's doing is we are cutting away all those other stories. We're undoing all of those other stories. So it might seem like we're doing something with this, but we're undoing so much more. This really shuts down all other thoughts for me. And in that way, I'm undoing a lot of conditioning, undoing a lot of believing. I might believe these two questions, but in doing so, I'm not believing so many more. So this is a process. This, again, I told you within one day, I would strongly agree on 6 of these. And it was another year or more before I felt strongly agree on 2 of them. And so it's something you can revisit these questions along your process. And if this is something that you want some help with or clarification, I do work with people one on one in sessions. I do a lot of work with somatic experiencing, with non duality, with the blend of these two. There's a lot of things that I've kind of put together as I've worked with both of these, but I also go through these questions and address whatever blocks might be coming up for you. So if you're having conceptual blocks, like, yeah, Nina, I like that one, but this other one, it just doesn't make sense because of this, this, and this. And you tell me your arguments and we can address those conceptually. But another avenue that we can explore is clearing any emotional blocks to these, where you say, yeah, I know it's true intellectually, it makes sense, but it doesn't feel true. And that's just a stuck, stored emotion in the body. We clear it, suddenly it feels true if you thought it was true to begin with. So,
Yeah, so yeah, I'd probably say that apologies if my responses are jilted or stilted. It's because I don't really have any kind of agenda or pathway in mind. It's just, I guess, what's entering my mind, which at this point I would say it's helpful to have this overarching view that the truth is shining all the time. It's completely obvious. It's the closest thing to you. It's you. It's who you are. It's so obvious. It's right there. So then that must mean that we are doing things that are covering it up. So if
yeah.
you have the attitude of just doing less, that helps massively. You, when it comes to like quietening thought and quietening your bodily senses, using breathing techniques and meditation if you have to, so you can see things as they are, because that's the only thing that's been asked of you, for you to just stop doing things, stop thinking constantly, stop being obsessed with these emotions, stop grasping outside you at these external objects that you see, and just stop everything. And if you do that, like, that's obvious. All the work in spirituality is just getting people to stop doing everything so they can see what's already there.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah,
That's
and
probably
I
the
think
only thing I'd add.
yeah, and I think many teachers are saying these things, and then a lot of us are like, "How?" You know? And that's where I feel like having some guidance around it can be helpful. I guess I still remember when I started. I still remember when, because now I can go into long stretches of peace and not doing, but I still remember how it felt to not know in what direction to put effort. You know, Ryan talks about, yeah, do nothing from ego. Effortlessness from ego is important, but we do put an effort or tapas for our dharma or for our spirituality and understanding. So I think that it can be important for beginners to be able to differentiate what kind of effort they're putting in and where, and have some guidance on it. But
Well,
I hear
I
what you're.
believe,
Mhm.
yeah, I believe effort, like in terms of karma yoga, if you do something with no expectation of you getting anything from it, even self-realization can be seen this way. So honestly, if the best thing you could do, the best thing I could have ever done for this entire world is for myself to look into my own nature. Just the very act of seeing others as myself means I at this point I don't really have the potential to go and hurt someone viciously because I wouldn't do that to myself. Um, so that really helped. But yeah, as you said, it helps to have instructions on how to stop doing because there's so much automaticity going on in the mind. Simply hearing stop doing stuff isn't enough, which is why there's this entire 8 limbs of yoga that's been created to pacify the body and mind so that things can be seen as it is. That's really what the yogis are saying. The yogis are saying that's how the yoga is different from the part of Vedanta, which is Vedanta is almost completely looking, like discerning, vichara, complete discernment of how reality is. It's like proper philosophy, where yoga is actually the 8 limbs are just speaking about quietening the mind, quietening the body through breathing techniques and pranayama and um, going inside the mind, dhyana, and all all different limbs of yoga. It's all geared towards just pacifying all these things that we are doing. So that's where the entire spiritual journey lies in me. It's just stopping this ignorance, the veiling of reality that's causing this ignorance by the mind. It's just the mind veiling reality constantly. That's all that's happening here.
Mhm. Mhm. That reminds me, I have a couple of videos I'll link here. There's a part 1 theory, and then part 2 is a meditation that takes you through 7 or 8 different things that we think we're not doing anything, but we're unconsciously doing. So maybe you would find that helpful, those of you watching. Thank you, Aloshan, for, discussing this with me. As you can see, we don't agree on everything, but we've had different experiences. So find what works for you. There are things that Aloshan and Ryan don't agree. I guess there might be some things that I don't agree with Ryan, but I can't think of them right now. It seems pretty much in alignment for me, and I think he did tailor his program for me. And so
The funny thing is that I can't think of anything that I disagree uh with Ryan.
I can
So
think of
it's
something you both disagree on.
oh, tell me.
Yeah, it's
I'd
the
like to know.
it's the definition of self-realization. He defines it earlier than you do. So he'll say with the conceptual self-realization that it's enough for that definition, but you still have to go further into the transcendent, but that's where you define it. But he will see this as almost going into liberation work. And then the other thing you guys disagree on is staying in the feeling of being, and you feel that it's important to not skip that intermediate step, but he doesn't think that's important. He thinks it's okay to go straight to the top.
Okay, cool.
So
That's really interesting. Yeah, no, definitely the second part. For my journey, I don't have a belief that this is this is the prescriptive way everyone should be. But for my
yeah.
journey, definitely, like the sense of existence, of being, is an important part for
Hmm.
me. It's not privileged over anything else in the big scheme of things. I understand that, but yeah, I definitely found how I guess only identifying with the I am at a certain point was much less taxing on my entire
Yeah.
body than identifying with absolutely everything that entered my mind and my body and like everything. Just the sense of existence allowed myself to calm down enough to see how
Yeah.
things were. The self-realization def definition, it's interesting because I feel that if we're actually going to delineate things, it should be when something has occurred. So a realization has happened. And before the transcendent realization, that's just your mind kicking things around, trying things on for size, getting understandings of it. But until the transcendent realization hits, different from someone who's just thinking about the stuff.
Well, understanding it, not just thinking about it, but understanding it logically and knowing that it must be true. The way that we know 2 + 2 is 4. But I hear what you're saying. I think that we spoke about in the last interview about how once you've got this down, you're just waiting for that transcendent realization, and there's not much you can do about it.
Yes,
And
so
so,
it does just definitely doesn't hurt. So it's like there's no way any of this would hurt. So if you are waiting around anyway, why not have this understanding? I can see how it could help and never hurt.
but,
Definitely.
but see, I worked with several non-dual teachers for 7 years before I met Ryan. Okay, and they weren't all the way. They were not enlightened the way that Ryan is. And so I had so many experiences that I mean, I went into bliss. I mean, just hundreds of times, okay? But I did not have this understanding. And that is what Ryan did for me. And the understanding is so much more stable now than it ever could have been before. And I think you have a very logical mind and you already had a lot of this in place
Yes.
before
So
you met Ryan. I think it's hard for you to relate to me or somebody
yes, I was about to
who does
say
not
Ryan
have
was
that.
mentioned. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I was about to say Ryan was mentioning to me like 2 years ago where he put it as you don't have the logical training that I had. Now, I'd never had any formal logical training, but my dad's a maths teacher, and I was deep into like logic and maths and science and all of this from a very young age. So when I started looking at this, I valued thought and logic above like all else. So Ryan actually did spend like a year with me going through this because I asked him to logically prove to me that there's such a thing as
Well,
absolute. Don't even say God. I say prove to me I respect logic and nothing else. Prove to me logically there's absolute.
but do
So
you see
looking
how
at
you
your
needed it? How do you see how you
yes,
needed it too? It might not be in
yes,
this framework, but you needed the
yes,
logical proof, and that's what we're
yeah,
doing.
yes, yeah. I needed that. I needed to be brought out of the terms of fantasy, some religious fantasy, absolute God thing, and into, well, show me by logic how this is true. And by showing me that, it opened the possibility of me looking into it further. Because if he failed to do that through logic, I would say, right, you're just another charlatan with your charlatan nonsense. Please go away. And I would never look at it again. So definitely him going back and forth with me for a long time helped me continue to be like, oh, this guy values logic and he's logically correct. He's always consistent. What he's saying is definitely there's something going on here. And that led me to continuing. So yeah, there's definitely
So,
something
so
in
this
there.
is now you're remembering your initial part of your journey where you
Yes,
needed this. Okay,
yes, yes.
so we're good.
So
Now,
that's what I'm saying. Don't take anything that I say as some kind of complete. It's just I'm just here today, tonight, or wherever, as my perspective as things are currently for me, and that's it.
yeah, and I'm working with beginners or people who are on the path where there's still certain blind spots and that sort of thing, and this can be very helpful. I guess when we get to a certain place and we forget how we started, I think we run the risk of throwing out the things that were helpful and forgetting the things that were helpful for us,
Yeah,
that could be helpful for other people.
it's why I'd never want to be a teacher or call myself a teacher or try to teach
Yeah.
people in any kind of fashion because yeah, I have made it a habit for me not to read because my mind has this habit of being so busy. I purposely make it a habit to not retain any information. It's only what happens in the moment, dies in the moment. That's it.
Hmm.
Everything
Yeah.
else I write down. I have notes and I have appointment calendars. I try to keep absolutely nothing in here because there's no need for anything to be there.
Hmm. Yeah. Follow Alotion on his YouTube channel if you want to learn more about the things he shares on there. And if you want to work on it further one on one, feel free to contact me. We can go through this. We can work on other aspects of the work, include the somatic work. And so I am grateful, Alotion, for you being here. And thanks
Welcome.
everyone for watching. We'll see you next time.